as IAM Online for June. We thank you and welcome you to this afternoon's webinar, which is InCommon IAM 101. I'm April Motley. I'm the communications lead for InCommon, and I'm happy to be your host for this portion of the program as we're getting underway. This is the monthly webinar series brought to you by InCommon and Internet 2 that focuses on identity and access management. As we're getting underway this afternoon, please note that we are going to be taking questions using the live, using the Zoom Q&A function. So please use that function to post your messages during the presentation. We want this to be as interactive as possible, and we're going to take questions at the end of the presentation. In addition, also want to let you know that we are recording today's webinar, and you're going to receive the link to the recording via email, and it'll also be posted at our website. So you will get both the link and the slides that are shared this afternoon via email after the webinar. Having said that, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Jean Horoshevsky, InCommon Academy Director, to tell us a little more about this afternoon's webinar. Jean?
Yes. Thank you so much. And hello, everybody. Welcome. And thanks again for joining us today for a special edition of IAM Online. Today, we have a very exciting webinar in store for you, exploring the key aspects of identity and access management, especially for research and education. And our featured speaker today, Ben Rapelier, will share his insights and practical examples of IAM and its implementation. But today's webinar also serves as a great prelude to InCommon's virtual Basecamp workshop that's coming right up July 10th through 14th. And this webinar actually is in direct response to feedback we received from the community and a desire to have this IAM 101 primer before Basecamp starts. You know, Basecamp is an excellent entryway into IAM and a wonderful professional development opportunity that's perfect for any of you who are newer to IAM or InCommon or both. If you've already registered to attend Basecamp next month, why don't you put BC in the chat? We'd love to know that you're here. And if you haven't registered yet and you're thinking about it, we want you to check out the information that we have about it on our website. You'll get to see the agenda and the program and the schedule and the speakers, and we are putting a link in the chat for you too. And if you feel you can't quite fit in Basecamp yet this year, this afternoon's webinar will give you a brief introduction to the basics of IAM for higher ed, and we are very glad that you're here. So now I would like to introduce you to our moderator this afternoon, Marta Lang. So Marta has been navigating and advancing IAM challenges for over 10 years at UT Austin. She is currently the Senior IT Manager of the IAM team, and she is also a member of IAM-Her. UT Austin has been on a modernization journey since 2019 that started with the implementation of Shibboleth as the central authentication system for the university. UT Austin also participated in the 21-22 InCommon Collaboration Success Program as the team began the implementation of Midpoint and Grouper. These tools are being implemented in phases for the UT Austin campus to replace legacy applications and to bring modern IAM functionality. Well, Marta, so glad you're here. I will turn it over to you now. So please take it away.
Thank you, Jean. Hello, everybody. Without further ado, I want to introduce you to our speaker today, who's going to be presenting, Ben Rapelier. He's a manager at, of the Office of Identity and Access Management from Illinois State University. He's been working in the IAM sphere since 2018 and has been tapped into the InCommon community since then. He's attended Midpoint and Grouper trainings, and he's here to talk to us about the fundamentals of IAM ahead of Basecamp. Ben, take it away.
So I'm here to talk to you guys today about some important things that I've learned in the past few years, and also as a community member that thinks it's important that we talk about all these things, because otherwise, how are other people going to learn? We need to make sure we are sticking together on this and make sure that we are all staying up to speed. And one way we can do that is talking about them and sharing our experiences. So I'm going to jump into that right now. Just highlighting 3 things I wish I'd known when I started. First thing I always tell people is that there's no cookie cutter configuration. Drop-in applications, drop-in services, I find have not worked for me. There are no 2 institutions that are the same, is what it comes down to. Some institutions focus on research, others on maintaining a good reputation for producing good teachers. They're state funded, they're privately funded. And if you have medical schools inside of your college, you already have a lot more restrictions and complications than others. And what it comes down to is my university is different than yours. And all that is different than the commercial as a rule. Commercial expectations for IAM are pretty high level, if you will. There's identity governance, certification and compliance, and cost and risk avoidance. And where higher education is special and it gets complicated is that we have fuzzy borders. There is no, the needs of higher education are different from corporations in the sense that the fuzzy borders are, well, this person's gone, but we don't want them to lose access. There's any number of reasons that happens. A lot of the time it's research for us. And then there's also the fuzzy borders of federation. And what I mean by that is, as an employee at Caterpillar, I couldn't go to John Deere and log into their systems and access their Wi-Fi. It's a cut and dry separation. The federation enables so many things that are beneficial to both universities or both institutions and the community at large, that it's not something we want to shut down, but it is something we want to encourage. Commercial solutions for IAM don't really get higher education. They don't understand things like grace periods. For example, when a student graduates at ISU, they keep their account for a year. Then they can log into their email for a year. And in the corporate world, that just cuts off. So having to explain that to corporate people has been interesting in the past for us, for sure. And with that, I'm going to move on to my next slide here because it brings me to my next topic here. Ask questions. And what I mean by that is find out the reasoning behind things that we're doing. Why do students have an account for a year? And oftentimes when I started, the answer I got was, we've always done it this way, or we don't know any other way of doing it. And by asking questions, we could find a way to say yes, so that we are making people's lives better and improving our services or products and things that we work with. But the other reason I say ask questions is acronyms are everywhere. And I found that particularly challenging when I first started in IAM, because acronyms, IAM even, for example, there are quite a few in my presentation. I'm going to try and bring my attention to them. And there's also documentation that we're working on as a community to enable people to just click into a dictionary and say, hey, what's this? As far as the community is concerned. And the third thing that I was very happy to find out when I first started was that there's a community. When I first started with IAM, we were on a commercial product that I will talk about later, but I didn't have any other communications. Our vendor was not the best or the most responsive about things that we wanted to do. And once I've started working with InCommon and the community that they have, I found a wealth of knowledge. And what it boils down to is someone else has done what you want to do or is doing it already. And if you need help, they're willing to help. So what that brings me to is components of IAM. What are the components of IAM? I'm going to be speaking into these a little bit more in each of my following slides. but it's going to be talking about what it takes to be an IAM practitioner in higher education. Core function of IAM practice is what are people expecting and what are the outcomes? And then we're going to talk a little bit about future trends that we are seeing right now. So the IAM practitioner in higher education is a complicated role. It literally ranges all over the board. And you have to be able to make sure that your setup and data is secure. But you also have to have the business analyst skills to see where the university is going. You have to be able to work with a vendor or manage the tools yourself and use the analysis that you get from the business analysis side of things to plan for how you're going to handle things in the future with integrations with your school, other schools. And then also you have to maintain organizational knowledge so that you know whose toes not to step on to make sure that you can do your next upgrade and to make sure that your data is safe. And also, last but not least, you have to have a community backing because it takes a village, in my opinion, to maintain a good environment. Self-reflection really helps too, being able to look at what you have now, see where your gaps are, and analyze that to say, well, we're strong in these areas, but we lack this. Is there a vendor or is there a person that we could be talking to that would help us fill that gap? But all these skills and knowledge are used for these four things primarily: identity registration, grouping, provisioning, authentication. And I'm going to, like I said before, I'm going to go into more detail on these, obviously. But as a practice, we're managing the identity registry, we're handling the grouping of users, and we're provisioning them out to the things that they are using for authentication. And the end goal is that the right people should have the right access at the right time, and the right time they shouldn't have it anymore. So how do we do that? At ISU, and we base a lot of our stuff off of the community. We have a flow of data that pulls from institutional systems of record, and that can be any number of systems that we're talking about there. But I would call them our inputs, if you will. So you got your student information systems, your human resources, alumni relations, and those feed into your person registry. Person registry then distributes the data to the people or the places that it needs to go. And the aggregated systems consume that data and then either pass it along or process it to allow it to be used by their systems also. One of the places it pushes is the grouping systems that manage populations of groups for access policies and things like entitlements. Grouping systems also pass the data they are contributing to the provisioning systems, which in turn enable and disable access rights in our end systems, thinking like AD, LDAP, Azure AD. Person registries also populate data into the authentication and federation services, which enable access to services that are both local and remote. This is comprised of things like SHIB for access. Well, let's look at this in more detail in the next couple of slides here too. So identity registries, data aggregation is the primary function there. Multiple systems will feed you the data about the same user. It is the job of the registry to organize it and make sure it is the same person and then pass that data along. Where we often see problems is, what if a person has multiple roles? The system has to make a decision about what is most important and base services on the sum of their roles or on a hierarchical value. So, for example, we have a lot of people here at ISU that are grad students, but they're also instructors for courses. So which of those values or which of those roles should be the priority? Which one should other people see them in? And what data is displayed about them to others or in the system so that they can get to the right resources? Person matching and deduplication, I'm not going to get into a whole lot today, but some things to think about are, where in your chain of events and systems does that occur for you? And how do you clean up duplicates when they do happen for you. Person repositories, that's where your identity registry is storing or getting its data from. There's a lot of different ways and methods of handling this data. And it comes down to what do we know about our subject and how are these systems, how these all systems interact is going to be defined by your institution. And that is going to be a lot of mental processing to figure out what you want to use. It's going to be influenced by data flow, need for data availability, cost of application capability. And what we at ICU have wound up using is actually a combination of a couple of these even, which is funny because Gartner says there's only 4, but ours seems to be more of a combination of a couple of them. But like I said, it depends on how you need your data to flow, how stable you want it to be, and what you want to be the source of record in the end. So part of having the data registry or the person registry is so that you can identify individuals and proof their identities. So when they try and log in, we need something about them to say, this is the real person. And yes, they have access to this. There are lots of acronyms on this page. I apologize in advance. But what we do is we gather the information about users from the user so that we can identify them. And we make sure that the information we have is true, correct, current, and linked to a real life subject. Claimed identity in a real life subject submitting a request is compared and confirmed. So it's I'm walking through this real quick. Resolution. So we gather the information. They say this is me. We verify it, and then we link them to the service that they need. Grouping is the next category, high-level category. So there are several different models of grouping, and they are essentially going to be broken down by the different tools that we actually use to do the grouping. But the core things are that there are going to be high-level roles that are determined by what people do or what they are or how they're identified in the systems. And that's the institutionally meaningful cohorts. What does it mean for a person to be a teacher at your institution? What does it mean for them to be a student at your institution? And the access policy rules are going to be what resources are provided for them in that capacity. I'm also going to be talking about what role-based access control and attribute access-based access control have to do with anything, and how grouping is applied to access management. So institutionally meaningful cohorts are going to be things like users are in a class, they're a student. And what that does is it then is passed from one system to the next, and the next system refines that data further. So at the very basis, we're given the raw data. And then institutionally meaningful cohorts or reference groups, and this is what I have in the diagram here, are going to be groups that are groups of subjects that are composed from the basis groups by refining the criteria of who is included. So we know that there are students, we know that there are classes, and a reference group could be students that are in a specific class. The reference groups are then passed to the application or made available to an application to determine who is allowed to have access to the application. For an instance of Canvas, in this case, is what we have as our example. And that is determined through an enterprise access policy, control policy. I'm gonna take a drink real quick, pardon me. So role-based access control, role-based attribute control versus attribute-based access control. Role-based access control is using a group of people that are loosely defined to assign a role. And oftentimes that actually assigns them an affiliation or subject attribute on their account that can then be used as an ABAC or attribute-based access control to give a refined permission or access. Access policies also are going to pull in things like environmental conditions. So where is this user? Are they allowed to access this from Spain? Or an IP range, or things like that. Object attributes are going to be also the things like users departments, for example. It's standard things that are on the attribute or on the object in the LDAP or AD or the system record there that can be pulled in and used as part of your evaluation. And looking at the diagram, we have to consider, where do we express our access policy? What data drives your access policy? And where is your policy enacted, which is going to be your PEP or your PDP. And look at that. We're going to go into that a little deeper because that's complicated and a lot of acronyms again. Essentially, summing up what we're looking at the previous slide, though, is allowing an access service provider to read from LDAP the attributes that are referred to in the role/permissions to allow access to the service provider, to allows the access service provider the ability to know whether a user should be admitted or not. How grouping relates or comes into this is it's the access management. It's the institutional roles mapped to the access policies. Access policy groups, which are the course-defined, course-grained entitlements, if you will, are provided by the IAM infrastructure, and the fine-grained permissions managed within the service provider itself, the application. So to make it a little more simple, I'm trying to log into Canvas. Shib says, okay, my user role is a student. Should students have access? Yes, they should. It lets me in. Provisioning and deprovisioning. This is going to get a little more technical and a little more fun. But important concepts we're going to talk about are just in time and just in case provisioning and attestation and access certification, and what those have to do with getting into things. I'm not going to read all this because it's a lot, but essentially what just in time is versus just in case is, just in case you're provisioning ahead of time, you are assigning a entitlement or a resource before the user has access, or before the user is trying to access the utility or the tool. And it has its pros and it has its cons. Obviously, you can do things ahead of time. If you have an environment that needs configuration before the user is trying to log in, this is a great way to do it. But it also is not scalable because you have to make sure that you have all the data ahead of time. So if you have a lot of users that are added at the last minute, you're not going to have the environment ready for them. And so timeliness is this other downside, and that's what I was trying to say there. Sorry. So it requires time ahead of them trying to log in. Just in time, on the other hand, is there's a minimal amount of setup in the back end that you have to do. It's not coupled very tightly with an application or the infrastructure. So you're logging in and you get a generic page and everything that you need is there, but it's based on things that can be grabbed and put in there immediately. It gets challenging to make sure that people have permission-free login, and challenging to audit after the fact, because the point in time is going to be a lot faster and it's going to blur through your logs a lot more quickly. Attestation is seeking to review whether or not a user should still have access to something they've already been granted access to. And access certification is going through and validating that a user still meets the criteria that put them in a role. Our systems are using grouping to do this. Essentially, we have a query that talks to our system of record and says, okay, this person is enrolled for this next term and they have an enrollment appointment date and they've paid all their fees, they're a student. And when any one of those criteria falls off, the access certification process runs and says, okay, this doesn't apply to them, remove them. And that's really what we're looking for. So when we get into authentication and federation, we're talking about how do people actually get approved to log into the system. And high level, it's going to be several different methods of doing it, and we're just going to cover the big ones here. Directory-based authentication is one of the more simple routes and can be used in combination with other authentication methods. The password is stored in the directory, and when a user is attempting to log in, the directory password is confirmed as being correct or not by the login portal. And then the relationship between the schema and the identity registry, it also plays a role here because those are also things that can be pulled into your portal. But this is a more simple model, an easier to implement model. You're going to find that people will get aggravated or annoyed with having to repeatedly authenticate into systems. And that's where our next step comes into play. The single sign-on is at the highest level is a method of allowing users to log in one time and remain logged in for an entire session across multiple tools or systems. It's important from several standpoints. Security is the number one, always. Users are more likely to use better passwords if they only have to enter it once. And also the passwords are stored in a more centralized fashion, so there's control over them. You're not having to authenticate into multiple different applications. So say, for example, Canvas is a system that's external to your university and would store its own passwords. It's a hypothetical. You would have to authenticate with the password for Canvas, and Canvas would have to know that it was the correct password. In this case, single sign-on, you log in one central location, and that system or that token that you're assigned tells Canvas that you are already authenticated and that you can stay in and access the data that you're trying to. Entities, identity provider is going to be your authorization server, and that is responsible for your creation, maintenance, and managing user IDs. It's also what sends the data to the service provider, which is going to be the actual thing that does the authentication, receives the authentication assertions from the IDP and authenticates the user. So it's what actually processes the data that comes from it, from the actual login attempt. Say that these are things to note. The important technologies at the bottom there are going to be something that if you are working on implementation of a single sign-on, you're going to need to know these terms. But they're also a rabbit or a wormhole, if you will, to a large number of other topics. So this is something we could get into a discussion later, but not something I'm going to go into now. Taking the security aspect of single sign-on a level further, we are encouraging everyone to use multi-factor authentication, which is a higher level of authentication assurance. And Multi-factor authentication often uses a combination of three things to authenticate a user. Something you know, like a password, something you have, like a token, or something you are, like biometrics. Say, for example, you wanted to log into your account at IAM University. You'd go to the login screen, you'd enter a password, username and password rather, and it would ask you to approve the login via an application on your phone, which would be considered a token method in our case. This method of splitting up the authentication increases the likelihood that it's going to be difficult to impossible for a hacker or a malactor to be able to access both systems. It's unlikely that they are going to get both my phone and my password unless they are physically where I am and have taken them. There obviously are risks to this. SMS is discouraged, or excuse me, sending a text message to a phone with a one-time password is discouraged often because of things like SIM hacking or SIM card takeover, essentially, where a malactor will impersonate a phone, and when the person tries to have that second factor sent to their phone, it goes to the other malactor's phone instead. But there are a number of other options. The one-time password, like I mentioned, FIDO keys are a physical token that you can plug into a computer and will represent that token-based thing. Push to application is another method where it sends like a bank. Everyone is using bank applications anymore. Bank applications often will use this type of setup. And then WebAuthn and Apple Touch ID. So part of the single sign-on, and in this case, Shibboleth is basically what we're talking about. Attribute delivery is part of it. Data is delivered from an identity provider to service provider at login. And what I mean by that is, attribute delivery is used to determine if a user is authorized to a particular service or to customize a service for them. And that attribute release policies control what attributes are allowed to be released and to whom. Service providers can also be grouped and tagged, allowing for the release policies that govern them to know how to handle the data. And what this does is it gives us the ability to say, okay, when people try and log in here, our identity registry system is going to pass along the fact that they're a student, the fact that they're in this class, and that they should have permissions to access this resource, or that they should see a specific view of that resource. These are really great things, and they can really customize and personalize the feel of an experience. I really encourage to look into those if you haven't. But anytime we do those things, we need to make sure that the attribute assertions are at least signed. If they're not signed, they should definitely be encrypted. But that really depends on the vendor and what you're doing. So you have to figure that out with them. Federation. What does Federation gain in universities? A lot, honestly. As it links a user identity across multiple systems so that the users can connect and collaborate at a different level. Much of what is mentioned about on this slide, we have talked about a bit already. However, I want to call out Discovery Service, as this has solved a lot of problems that were experienced previously. And essentially what it does is it allows the control to be passed back to the service provider, which increases flexibility, privacy, and security. And what Discovery Service is it identifies what university you are from so that it knows that you're an approved entity, and then also that it can help you get to the resources that you're allowed to access, essentially. So when I was, for example, InCommon uses this when I was signing up initially, I had to select that I was from Illinois State University and that we were part of the InCommon group. And it gave me the ability to log in using my Illinois State University username and password. And that was terrific because that meant that I didn't have to create a new account, that they already knew that I was a legitimate person and that I was authorized to access it. And we move on here. We're going to be talking, I want also to hit on bilateral versus multilateral federation in this sense. Bilateral is just one institution to another institution. And while that is great, it benefits both institutions and they can grow a lot from that experience. Sorry. You still have to worry about, well, now we need this other institution to help us with this research. What can we do? And the multilateral federation allows us to have as many federated institutions as necessary or needed. Where that is beneficial again is research, sharing documentation, sharing experiences, allowing for research to be done without borders. It's kind of the future, in my opinion. And that brings me to my other slide here, trends in future directions. Citizen identity, we are seeing legislation and pushes for things like digital passports, digital identifiers for every user or every person that might be on the internet, education IDs that are global. So I'm a student at a university, that the ID would be carried from that university to any other university I might go to. We've also been seeing trends of adoption for commercial cloud entities and things like Azure, Okta. And those are those can be challenging in their own rights because you have to work with the vendors and they are going to be targeted towards commercial entities like I was talking about before. So they're going to have to require some customization of the setup and customization of how they function. And I know Microsoft specifically has been working on understanding the education environment. Over the last several months, they've been reaching out and talking to people and working on implementing the things that have been recommended in their product. But it's a slow battle still, and it's going to be a continued fight for a long time. Constituent identity management and CRM overlaps. So you're going to see where your applicants are coming into the system and you're going to have your alumni overlap. And that's going to be something, again, that you're going to have to sort on at an institution level. How can you handle all of the identities that are coming into your system? How are you going to manage them? How are you going to deduplicate them? And self-sovereign identity is not going to go away, I don't think, either. And that is where you have the large bodies, the large groups, Google, Microsoft, etc., allowing you to create an account, verify it as it's you, and then use that identity to log into other systems. It's a powerful tool, and it's exciting to see where it's going. And I see the risk of it being that you have to make sure that you are monitoring it, that you are using it wisely. But it also it gives you a lot of control over all the different things that you're logged into, because it gives you the ability to say, in one location, I need to log out of that, and I'm going to log into this other tool to log out of that other tool, or disconnect from that one. And it gives you the ability to limit what other people see of you, because you have a single identity that is used in multiple systems. So what does all this look like in real life in higher ed? And I'm going to switch gears a little bit just to kind of give you a little bit of a journey that we've gone through at ISU, Illinois State University, and how things have progressed from where we were to where we're going. Before I started at ISU, Illinois State University, I should probably say that, sorry, because there are multiple ISUs. They were in the process of implementing an ERP which we went with the Oracle solution, Campus Solutions, and they assumed at the time that since we had an Oracle student information system, we should also have Oracle Identity Manager because they should talk well to each other, was the theory. We also had an Oracle LDAP at the time. We used OODSEE, and it was a rush conversion in the end. They had a deadline, so they installed OIM and just kind of slapped stuff onto it to make it emulate what the mainframe was already doing. And as time went on, they found that this didn't do a lot of the things they wanted it to do. For example, students had to be manually turned to being students. There was no automated activation for them. The deprovisioning was equally manually done. And if it wasn't done on a timely basis, they just continued as a student until they decided that they weren't anymore. So in 2018, we established an Office Identity and Access Management at ISU, and we got a lot of that cleaned up. We did a lot of design changes. We started sculpting a vision of what we wanted to do as a team and where we needed to go. Unfortunately, it was me. I was the only one on the team, so we lacked a lot of the resources that we needed. And we had a tool that was not designed to do what we wanted to do. In the end, Oracle Identity Manager was originally designed to be a phone book in the 90s. So when Oracle bought it, they simply just kind of strapped on additional functionality until it was this massive thing that I had never had training on. So when it came time to upgrade it to a newer version, because the version we had was outside of support, we started the quest. Literally, it became a quest. And after having tried at least 6 other IDMs, we settled on Midpoint with Grouper. So we decided to become part of the InCommon and participated in their collaboration success program. And that led to us getting the training that we needed and allowed us to implement the tools that we needed. Excuse me. And in 2022, we managed to bring Shibboleth online and replace one of our Oracle products completely. We had been also using Oracle Access Management. So just another one of those acronyms that kill me every time. OAM was replaced with Shibboleth, and it's been great and haven't looked back once. In 2023, this year, March, we brought Grouper online and had it take over group management from OIM. And even next week, we are bringing Midpoint online and having it take over for OIM, managing passwords, identities, and accounts in the directories. So we're excited, we're nervous, and we are ready for the future. That being said, I will hopefully be talking with people about how well it went, because we've been planning this for a long time and we've done a lot of validation and we are ready. I wanted to include some links and resources, and I'm assuming this will get shared out. When I was talking about Federation, there's a lot of things that go into that. So I wanted to make sure that people had links to that data especially. But I also want to make sure that if you have any questions that I might be able to answer, or if you're walking through getting rid of OIM also, or have questions about Midpoint and its functionality, or just anything, just want to chat about pizza. There's my email address, and I'm also in Slack with the community also. But with that, I will change it to the Q&A session.
Great. Thank you, Ben, for that informative presentation. The first question I see we have is, how many people are on your team today?
let's see, so there's 3 of us that are full-time Office of Identity and Access Management. And we in particular manage the the identity management system. The authentication side of things is a separate team, and they currently have only 2 people.
All right, great. I see another question in chat. Just a reminder to folks to please submit your questions using the question and answer. That helps filter out those questions so that we can address them directly. But the question is, are you deployed with on-prem resources or are you using a cloud infrastructure?
We are using a hybrid model. Essentially, we are using OpenShift in a containerized fashion, but then one of the OpenShift nodes is OpenShift nodes are on-prem, and we are using old hardware that's fast to manage that. But then we also store databases in the cloud, at least one node of each, so that if we have a problem, we can recover it from there. It was a big decision to go on-prem, but the knowledge was there, the resources were there, and timeliness was there, if you will. So we already were moving towards OpenShift anyway for other applications. It made sense that we would also implement this through an OpenShift, which again, we had a large environment on campus, so we went with that. And then the databases, we actually were on Oracle for our Oracle product, but we moved to Postgres with the implementation of Midpoint and Grouper, and haven't looked back, to be honest with you. We have DBAs that went through training specifically when we moved to Postgres so that we could make that change. But then again, we have a hybrid environment for our databases as well.
All right, awesome. We've got another question coming in. Can you share more about your project timeline for migrating onto Midpoint?
Sure. So, excuse me. We decided that we couldn't do it all at one time. And while Midpoint was capable of handling it all, we had to have a method of users being able to manage their information in it. So we have this custom portal that we call account self-service, that people log in, change passwords, manage their, I almost said security questions, but we're getting rid of those. So manage their MFA authentication, configuration, and things like that. And honestly, that was the largest amount of time was consumed by that and the resources that it took to develop that. The Midpoint, more or less, it was faster and simpler to get it up and running than other things we've worked with, and we found that the data validation was the longest thing with it, really. But we started, in 2022 really working on getting it implemented, and we were planning on going live with it in June of 2022. And the resources for the account self-service page were not available. So it took them almost a year to finally get that up and running. And then we also had to work out how we wanted Midpoint to talk to Campus Solutions. And that was the same team that was doing the development of the web page or the self-service page. So yet again, another delay potentially. So we had to walk through that. And in the end, we were working through a new system that other universities aren't really using yet for the way we're communicating with Campus Solutions from Midpoint is kind of unique in the fact that we're using a database layer that translates into a message queue that sends messages to Campus Solutions from Midpoint. So that was a lot to say. Yeah, it's taken us a year longer than we expected to be up and running. And we're just extremely excited about it.
Awesome. That's great. Next question. How are you handling students that return after years for a secondary degree? do you re-provision the accounts?
That's a great question. So our current setup, and we had several different ways of doing this originally. So when we started with mainframe, people were assigned an ID, and that they kept that ID through their entire life. Now, when we implemented OIM for the first year, there was a period of time where we were reusing IDs, and this was just the default configuration. It sounds like I wasn't here for this portion of it, unfortunately, but as soon as we figured out that's what was going on, we turned that off, and everybody gets a unique ID, and if they come back, they get that same ID and login information. So we do re-provision accounts, yes.
All right, great. Did you look at any other products before you implemented Grouper and Midpoint?
We did, yeah. We had developed a large number of criteria. I want to say it was like 21 different points that we were looking for in our IDM. And there were a couple that were close. We had a couple months where we were really convinced that we wanted ForgeRock. And when it came down to it, we received a presentation from the ForgeRock representatives and realized, no, this is not actually what we want. And so we had to start over again, and we worked through just analysis, just trying them out, seeing what they would do, getting demos of them, working in live environments if we could, talking to other universities that we knew were running similar systems to what we were running, and talking about how the transition from one to the other was going to be. We talked to University of Madison. It was, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name. They're from Canada. We talked to a Canadian university that did the exact same thing we did, moving from OIM to Midpoint, and found that that was a really good fit for them, and that they were running similar systems to that we were. It seemed to be a good fit for them. We went with it.
Got it. Awesome. We at UT Austin did also a similar kind of greenfield kind of exploration of different tools. So I think that's a pretty common approach. Next question. Does your institution grant identities to parents, family members of students for billing/grades? And if so, are they going to be in Midpoint?
So that's complicated. So the billing system has an option of giving guest access to parents, but the identity system does not register them. They are still registered as if they were the student.
Okay. It sounds like you guys talked to Western University in Ontario. We got a hint.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. All right. Was your implementation of Midpoint done all in-house, or did you have any professional services?
We had, no, yeah, we did that all in-house. But we did talk to the community a lot. We have signed up for and are working with Evolvium to gain their services or support going forward, starting in July. But the actual setup and configuration we have done in-house. We have one guy in particular that's really good with that sort of stuff, and it's been really helpful to have him as a resource. But we still wanted that support for the first year, at least, to know that any changes we need to make or anything like that, if we mess something up, we're going to have somebody we can reach out to and get help.
All right. Follow-up question to a previous one. Are you using a custom self-service portal to let people self-migrate starting in June?
Self-migrating. So we are going to be turning OIM off completely. And that's the one is we're doing that. So we're going to kill it. It's going to be gone. And how this is going to work is the new portal is going to be brought up, and it authenticates against Midpoint first. And if they have a password there already, it will process them there. But if they don't have a password in Midpoint, it will reach out to LDAP because we're not going to touch those passwords and authenticate them there and bring them into the account self-service portal so that they can reset their password. And that then at that point, Midpoint will have it and pass it to LDAP and AD. Does that answer the question? Sorry.
Yep. I think so. I'm going to combine two of these questions that have come in. How do you communicate updates to the campus about IAM, marketing, branding, to introduce new processes and procedures? That the communication aspect of what's y'all's approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a Teams channel that's all IT on campus. We talk about a lot of these things in. We've done, we have campus-wide IT gatherings, if you will, where we all get together and talk about what's going on, like what's new in the LMS system, what's new in the identity systems. And that's something we are doing a presentation on in August after we've had a time to get Midpoint up and running and everybody a little bit more used to it. We're going to be talking about how we're auto provisioning secondary accounts and things like that also at that time. But yeah, it's mostly just going to be not like mass campaigns where we're saying, hey, we're doing this, but it's going to be more along the lines of, hey, there's a need for that. Let's talk. We're going to be identifying, working with the users to identify what their needs are and make sure that we're getting them met.
Awesome. I think we've got time for one more question to wrap it up. How do you handle students that transition to employees?
That was complicated. So with that, we have a hierarchy of affiliations that we have utilized. So I can actually post a link to it if you want me to or need me to. But it's based on the different roles, they get put into a primary affiliation in the end. And what we've implemented is that the primary affiliation roles can all provision their access to AD and LDAP. And then the transition is pretty smooth, honestly, because what we have is once that student role falls off, the employee role takes over, and it's almost, like I said, seamless, where they don't even notice that this happened in the background, unless there was something, it's like some sort of change in licensing, where as a student they might have had access to a tool that they don't anymore, but as a general statement, they don't have any problem with it.
All right. I think that brings us, I don't think we have any more time for questions. So April?
Yes, thank you so much, Marta, and thank you to Ben and to Jean also for being here with us this afternoon. What a look, action-packed presentation. A lot of information there. I want to remind folks, you do not have to memorize all of that. You will be receiving the recording from today's presentation. You'll receive that via email. It will also be posted on our website. Just a couple of quick things before we let you go on with your day. If you have thoughts about today's program, there is a short survey that you'll get as you're leaving Zoom. If you take a few moments to fill that out, we really appreciate it. We value your feedback. If you have other feedback you'd like to share about IAM Online, you can certainly email me here at Internet 2. We'll be back next month with another program. So we have information there for you about that on this slide. And if you have ideas for future webinars, we do have a form on our website that you can use to submit those to us. So once again, we do want to thank you for joining. And if you think Basecamp would be a good addition to build on some of the knowledge that you've gotten here this afternoon, we encourage you to join us. Registration is open. And with that, again, I want to thank Jean, Ben, and Marta for serving as our host and facilitators this afternoon. And also thanks to Courtney and the rest of the Internet Meetings team for helping us bring this webinar series to you each and every month. With that, thank you again for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.